If it's out of tune, there's no amount of musicianship that's kind of get past the discomfort that the audience is required to endure.
That's today's guest, author and orchestra teacher Christopher Selby, on prioritizing intonation over everything. Welcome to Music Ed Insights. I'm leadership trainer and former band director Alan Fire, here with composer and co-college music education program head Steve Shanley.
Each episode, Alan and I talk with national thought leaders in music education with practical insights for K-12 music educators.
Steve, tell us about our guest.
Dr. Christopher Selby is a high school orchestra director in Charleston, South Carolina, and the lead string author of Habits of a Successful String Musician series published by GIA. He is an active clinician and conductor and has presented sessions at numerous Midwest clinics, American String Teacher Association national conferences, and many state conferences across the country. Find Chris's full bio, show notes, and resources at musicedinsights.com. Alan, what was the takeaway you had from this episode?
Such a clear rationale for prioritizing intonation and rhythm. How about you, Steve?
Well, listeners, you should know these ideas are totally applicable for anyone teaching an ensemble of any type, not just string teachers. I especially liked his 3 stages of ensemble awareness. I think we as conductors or directors often assume that anyone in front of us should have an awareness of what's going on in the ensemble, but it takes so much time to develop that skill, and the students need to be taught how to develop that awareness.
Very applicable and learnable indeed. And that painful reminder that newer teachers use dynamics as a go-to focus because it's an easier fix, I can relate. For just $5 a month, you can support this effort and get benefits like ad-free episodes. If you want the benefits of being a Music Ed Insights insider, head to our website to learn more. But for now, let's learn from Christopher Selby.
Christopher Selby, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much. I'm really excited to be here.
We've asked you here today to share your tips and tricks for helping our orchestras play in time and play in tune. I feel like we all know there are things like this that we should be doing, but sometimes we forget the why. So why should we prioritize these things? And what are some of the most common problems you are seeing when it comes to rhythm and intonation?
The should is an interesting question. I guess, we always are aiming for playing music, and maybe in some realm, the rhythm and the intonation should take a back seat to the music. But I think the most important thing when we're trying to express a thought is for it to be clear. And when we're trying to express a composer's thought, we want to make it as clear as possible. And in that way, I think poor intonation and poor rhythm muddle the message that the composer was trying to send. So in that respect, maybe playing in tune and playing with good rhythm is part of sending the clear message that the composer was trying to send. That creates one unified voice from the orchestra to the audience, and that unified voice is what we're aiming for when we're also talking about playing in tune and playing together with good rhythm.
I want to quick interrupt and ask Steve a question. Dr. Shanley, how does it make you feel as a composer to hear Chris say, playing in tune and in time honors the composer? Does that give you a little tingle?
It does. I like that, although not as much in my role as a composer, but I was going to ask Chris if in his experience, perhaps working at a festival as an adjudicator or going into work as a clinician, if you've encountered what I encounter in those situations, which is, hey, we've got a lot of rhythmic issues to fix. We've got a lot of tone quality intonation issues to fix. And the director says, and I say, yeah, but probably because the music was too hard. Your music is very hard, which is why this is making the rhythms and the tone quality and the intonation poor. And they'll say something like, oh, but it's so beautiful. We had great phrasing and we're working on the dynamics. And for me, there is no amount of phrasing or dynamics that are so awesome that it makes up for poor time in particular. I am guessing as you nod your head vigorously that you are in agreement there.
Yeah, in fact, I have a quick story to share with you. One of my first evaluations I ever received, I was 22, and my middle school orchestra was playing at one of these festivals. And I was convinced as a first-year teacher that my orchestra was playing incredibly musically. It was Eccles Sonata, arranged for orchestra in G minor. And so I've got two flats. It's a slow introduction, and I'm thinking my kids have the most beautiful phrasing there is. And I'm not really paying attention as a young teacher to how in tune they're playing. And we actually did not get a score that I liked very much. Let me just put it that way. And one of the comments from the judges was, well, you had great phrasing, but your pitch and rhythm really marred the performance. And those words stuck with me for the past 30 years. You're absolutely right. If it's out of tune, there's no amount of musicianship that's kind of get past the discomfort that the audience is required to endure to listen to what I say is a concert that only a mother could love.
You've got a two-step process for tuning the orchestra. And I bet many of our teachers are implementing step one, but I have a feeling step two might be a new idea for some. So please talk to us about this process and why you think it's important.
The step one is what you normally see from every orchestra. You take an A from a single source, whether it's a violin or a cello or a tuner, and then everybody tunes their A string to that A, and then they tune all the other strings. But in my experience, even all-state orchestras are still out of tune at this point. So it's important for us to continue this process. There's another step. I know a lot of more seasoned orchestra directors have started doing something that we call cross-tuning. And it involves tuning the whole orchestra in fifths. I learned this skill from a teacher named Dean Angeles, and I know a lot of other directors that use this cross-tuning technique, but it involves having everybody play an A at first without the tuner, and then what we're all doing is listening to each other and trying to agree on an A. Then I have the lower strings go down to a D, and what you have is an A and a D playing at the same time, and we're tuning a fifth, but all tuning to each other. Then the violins switch with the lower strings so that the violins are playing the D and everybody else is playing an A. And we're continuing to listen to each other and tune all of our strings. Then the lower strings jump down to a G, and they tune their G to the violin D. And then there's another switch, and this process continues till all of the strings are tuned. And there's two things going on. The most important is that we've turned off the tuner, and we're not just tuning our own instrument. And this is huge. In fact, this actually lays the groundwork for other skills that are going to be addressed later in the class. But when we talk about tuning, very often we're trying to tune our own instrument and we're only thinking about ourselves, especially young kids. And what this cross-tuning process does is we turn off the tuner, and the goal is now to tune your strings to everybody else, which is just a precursor to tuning your fingers to everybody else. And that is a skill that requires a certain kind of tuning tone and a certain kind of attention, both of which are critical when we ask our students later to tune to each other with their fingers.
So I kind of try something similar with my bands where, we don't have the open strings, obviously, to worry about, or all of I guess there's just way more variables where the strings can go off, which is, why stereotypically they're more out of tune. And I discovered that simply putting a tuner in their face wasn't going to fix much. And having the tuning slide in the right spot also wasn't going to be the end all be all. It needed to sound wrong to their ears.
Correct.
Like that's what I was trying to help them figure out is first it needs to sound bad to you and then you'll want to fix it. And that's the tough part. So I came up, and I might talk about this with Alan on a quick pro tips episode of ours later. But basically, this way of trying to work the ear muscle, develop the ear muscle so this sounds wrong to them. Is that kind of what this process is doing, helping them figure out when it sounds good versus bad? Or how does this kind of fit into the overall development?
So I want to be careful here because I know we've got all different kinds of programs out there. And if you've got an orchestra where you've got, 70, 80 seventh graders trying to tune their own instruments, they might need specific tuner boxes on their stand helping them get their instruments close. The process that I'm talking about here really is for high school orchestras or really good middle school orchestras where they can tune their own instruments. Everybody's tuning their own instruments. And to go beyond what you were just saying, though, it's not just about tuning your own instrument. It's about making sure that you're including the rest of the ensemble in what you call in tune. Because to be quite frank, there's no such thing as in tune, because that's an unfinished sentence. We have to be in tune with something else. Even when I'm playing the violin by myself, my strings have been tuned and my fingers are coming down in places that resonate with the strings. So I'm still in tune with my instrument. And the whole act of tuning has got to be more than just well, I'm in tune. That's only half the process. The real question is, that's nice, but are you in tune with everybody else? Because we need to make sure that everybody is in tune with each other.
So, what role does technique play in whether or not a student is in tune?
There's several roles that technique plays. And when we talk about technique, people have different kind of thoughts about what that actually means. So in terms of technique, there is instrument position, hand position. That's both left and right hand position. And it is important for kids to be playing with good left hand technique. If their wrists are flat or crooked, it's going to impair their ability to get to the notes. So with just basic setup is important for them to reach the notes and have them play with good tone. But beyond hand position, there's also finger patterns that we're dealing with. And those finger patterns are different for violin, viola, cello, and bass. It requires the teacher to be experts at all of those instruments and know how their finger patterns have tendencies and where those tendencies can lead the kids out of tune. So when we're talking about technique, we're generally talking about position work and setup, but we're also talking about finger patterns and possibly even shifting technique. There's two other things that I want to talk about, though. One is tension, and that's because that it's very easy when our left hands are tense that our finger we place our finger down onto a note, and then the hand kind of freezes, and that freezing stops the ability of the student or really impairs the ability of the player to fine tune that note. So just because you put your finger down close to the right place doesn't mean it's perfectly in tune, and it's important for those left hands to be very relaxed so that the thumb is not squeezing, and that will allow the fingers to do their final adjustment. The other side of that is the bow. So very often, going back to this original concept that kids are just thinking about themselves. They want to make sure they're playing the right note and they are playing in tune. In tune with what? I don't know, but they are playing in tune. So their tone is very self-centered. But when they start playing with what I call a tuning tone, an ensemble tone, it's a tone where things blend together. And this, frankly, is one area where bands have historically been way ahead of strings. So band has always been talking about balance and blend, 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 blend. I remember when I was a 22-year-old teacher, I just scoffed at the idea of blend. I thought, that's a band thing. But now, as a veteran teacher, I really realize that my students will never play in tune with each other unless they are really listening and blending. So tone is incredibly important when it comes to taking the students to that final level of intonation. And you almost have to hear it to understand it. I could talk till I'm blue in the face, but you really got to hear perfectly in tune what that sounds like. And I'll tell you, if you just put your headphones on and listen to Academy of St. Martin in the Fields, you go listen to some amazing orchestras, you'll hear them play, and they won't have that kind of road noise, that kind of mysterious scratch that's going through their tone. And that's because they are really listening to each other and blending well.
It's a gold mine of stuff you just shared. I have so many things I want to ask as follow-ups. I'm going to start with what you finished with, which was recommending to our listeners that they listen to the Academy of St. Martin so they can develop what that sounds like. Earlier, I referenced that we need to teach the students how it sounds when it sounds good. And so when it sounds wrong, they want to fix it. And this is one reason I encourage all of my music ed students, listen to the reference recordings. You are not going to conduct the Chicago Symphony on Mahler for a new recording. Like, you don't need to come up with your own interpretation. When you're in front of them and the bell is ringing and you've got classroom management, you just need to know something doesn't sound right in measure 4. It needs to sound wrong to you. So I don't want to gloss over that as we're teaching our students to play in tune, that the emphasis you had on it needs to sound in tune to the director. And once they get that figured out, they're always going to want it and therefore want to help their students get that. And do you have any recommendations other than listen to amazing groups for our teachers to help develop their own skills for whether or not something is in tune in the orchestra setting in particular?
Besides listening, the most dramatic and sometimes painful, but the most dramatic learning experience I've experienced myself and have shared with other people is to invite a guest artist into the room. Maybe, have pizza after school, have the kids just spend an hour or two with this master teacher, and then for you to sit down with a notepad and take notes. That would be the most amazing learning experience, not only for the students, but especially for the teacher, because those students are going to leave after that year or two. But the teacher is going to take what they've learned and use it for the rest of their career, hopefully. I think we should be doing a whole lot more of that.
And again, I love how teacher-centered you are with this. We're not bringing in an expert to tell the students what they're doing wrong, and I've been telling them this, and they just won't listen. So we're bringing in these experts, or we're going to these festivals so we as the teachers can learn more. And I've had a few listeners to the podcast reach out to me over the last couple of years and say, we're just so impressed. Like, you and Alan seem to be doing this because you want to learn. You want to keep learning. And yes, spoiler alert, that is basically why Alan and I are doing this. This is an excuse for us to continue learning because that's the only way we're going to get better. And I feel like sometimes with those festivals or bringing in clinicians, it's very easy for the teacher to say, all right, I'm out. Now you teach these students what I wasn't able to teach them. And your point is, no, 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 no. In fact, most of this is for me, the teacher. That's why I bring those people in.
Absolutely. Those events should be about the teacher, and a good teacher will take it as such.
Let's shift to rhythm. Do you have some common problems you've encountered as far as rushing and tempo control, and what solutions have you found that tend to work?
So when it comes to bowed string instruments, there are certain bowings that tend to rush. And I think one of the first things we need to do as teachers is just be aware that pizzicato, staccato, spiccato, double up bows, string crossings, dotted rhythms like a dotted 8th, 16th combination, there's a whole bunch of these that will tend to rush. And so we just need to be present and be aware that, oh, this is where my students are going to tend to rush. And once that awareness is there, then a good teacher is going to need several strategies in their arsenal to help teach students how to control their tempo. Because let's face it, you get up on stage at a concert and the students take off. It's not you needing to control your tempo. It's the students that need to control their tempo because they're the ones making the noise. So a few of the strategies that I use for controlling tempo, one is to make sure that we're practicing an excerpt that tends to rush. I make sure that the first thing we do is we practice that at different tempos. I used to, when I was a young teacher, think that if I just locked in and practiced only the perfect tempo, that they would be less likely to leave that tempo at a concert. What I've just done, though, is I've atrophied their ability to make adjustments. And by teaching the students to play at different tempos, they're actually learning the first step of controlling their tempo. The second step is to have them follow me as the conductor as I conduct different tempos. So now they're controlling their tempo and they're following the conductor with different tempos. This will make it a whole lot easier for you to control the tempo when you're on stage at the concert if they actually know how to follow you. And the best way to do that is to train them by taking their concert music and other things through different tempos. In fact, one conducting teacher. He was actually the conductor of the Charleston Symphony at the time. He came and worked with my kids, and he was like, Chris, your students are not responsive enough. You need to rehearse with more different tempos. You need to change your tempos more often. And I really took that to heart, and it made a lot of sense. And now I do. If I feel like my kids are not responding to my tempos, I'll slow down extra or I'll speed up a little bit more, and they'll just wake up and realize that they've gotten complacent. So that's a very important skill. The last part of these three is to teach kids how to accelerate and decelerate without a conductor. So I'll step off the podium and say, okay, as we go through this passage, I want you to intentionally rush together. Go ahead, go. And then we'll do it again. And I want you to intentionally slow down, but slow down together. And that is teaching them to listen and control their tempo.
Finally, can you tell us about your 3 stages of ensemble awareness?
So I think most kids, because they're kids, they're thinking about themselves. They think about, am I playing the right notes? Am I playing in tune? Am I playing the right rhythms? When they start to learn that they need to match the people in their section, that is a larger sense of ensemble that students need to learn. And the way I teach them to listen to the other people in their ensemble is, in their section, that is to ask them, okay, what part of the bow is your section leader in? What type of bow stroke is your stand partner using? And that sort of gets kids out of their own stand, out of their own music, and asks them to pay attention to the other people in their section. But really, the most important thing is for them to get out of their section and listen across the ensemble. And that really is the highest level of awareness. So the 3 stages are self, section, and then finally getting out of that section and listening to people that are in other sections on other sides of the ensemble.
Good stuff for anyone leading any type of musical ensemble right there. Well, before we get to the lightning round, where can our listeners go for more information on these topics?
GIA Publications is the publisher that publishes all of my books. And there is Habits of a Successful Orchestra Director, which a lot of these ideas that you're hearing in this podcast are coming from that book. And that is more of a how-to book. It's not necessarily a college textbook, but it's a book for new teachers and veteran teachers to help them just kind of reflect and think about what they're doing. The book that I use with my students, the method book, is called Habits of a Successful String Musician. We just came out this spring with a new 2nd edition, and we're really excited about that. I just love this edition. It's got many wonderful exercises for teaching upper level, grade 4, 5, and 6 ensembles. And then we also have a middle level book, and we came out with a beginner series this spring as well. So we now have a new beginning book for beginner students, and we are just thrilled about that. It's a great combination of habits, techniques, more traditional methods that you'll see in a lot of other method books. And then there's a lot of Suzuki concepts that have been woven into this beginner series. So it's taking really great ideas from a bunch of different methods and wrapping them into one resource.
All right, you're not getting out of here without a Music Ed Insights lightning round. Are you ready?
I am ready.
All right, one of my favorite food cities in the entire world, Charleston, South Carolina.
Amen.
What restaurant do I need to check out the next time I'm there?
We have so many, but the one that I wanted to mention in this is called Muse, M-U-S-E. It's in downtown Charleston. It's a renovated house that is like, this house is 100 years old, but it's been turned into a restaurant. Just the idea of Muse as being, this inspirational thing that helps composers and, all artists. And for there to be a restaurant in downtown Charleston called Muse, when we have guest artists, we often take them there, and it's fantastic food, great place to be.
How about a piece of music, a composer or performer you wish more people knew about?
There is a Japanese-American composer who is about my age. Her name is Yukiko Nishimura. She does a lot of string work and has a lot of compositions out there for strings, but I believe she also does band arrangements as well. And there's something just really refreshing, fresh, and beautifully musical about about her works. I think she is just a creative giant, and just love the textures and harmonies that she weaves into her compositions. So I just can't say enough about her. Yukiko Nishimura, she's one of my faves.
Favorite film or TV series you've enjoyed recently?
I guess my favorite's whatever I happen to be watching. And if it's with my wife, we've been watching these All Creatures Great and Small series on PBS. If it's just me by myself, I've really been getting into Yellowstone and 1923 and 1883. So there's a guy inside me for sure. But I absolutely enjoy spending time with my wife and kids, and that's one of the things we do. We watch TV together.
The most memorable live music performance you've attended?
When my wife and I were early in our relationship, I took her to see Isaac Stern with the Greenville Symphony. It was one of his last performances. And apparently he was not happy with the conductor. So while it was really special to be able to see Isaac Stern while he was still living, what was really incredible too was he would get up in almost in front of the conductor, and he was sort of arguing with the conductor in front of the audience and the orchestra. And he was like, no, you will play it my way. And it was just extraordinary to see. It wasn't extraordinary to see an argument so much, but everybody was really committed, and it was just incredibly memorable, to be perfectly honest, and memorable for a musical reason. It was just very great playing, and it was wonderful to see such an icon. And it was also neat to see live music actually happening live. It wasn't like they had just beat the horse to death. They were really still working on it.
And finally, a book recommendation for our listeners.
So I just got done reading Into Thin Air, which is about this catastrophe on Mount Everest. And I had this strange connection between feeling like I was struggling breathing, and then the past February and March, when I often feel like I'm struggling to catch my own breath. And so there was this kind of climbing to the top of Mount Everest connection that I was having as a string teacher, as a music director, trying to just get through February and March, that was just kind of meaningful for me. So I don't know if it's my favorite book, but it certainly is one. Can I mention one more too? And that is a book that really saved my soul as a teacher. When I was 25 years old, I had a bunch of teenage girls that were constantly crying in my class. And I blamed myself every day, and I was about ready to quit teaching. And then I read this book called Reviving Ophelia. It's by a psychologist, Mary Pfeiffer, Pipher. And I realized that a lot of teenage girls just happen to go through this thing. And you can call it what you want, but and I think boys go through their own thing too. But what I learned in this book was that girls and just young people go through a thing. It doesn't mean the teacher's doing anything wrong. It doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with the kid either. It's just something they've got to go through. And the best thing we can do is just be the rock, and be the solid source that they can have their chaos, just as long as they can come back and draw from your strength. One of the quotes in there is, they're going to be on a roller coaster. That doesn't mean you have to get on it with them. You need to stay on the sidelines and wait till they get off their roller coaster so that you can be their rock. So Reviving Ophelia really saved me. I was about ready to give up teaching, and I learned a lot from that book.
Christopher Selby, it was great to visit with you today. So much for our listeners, just packed with stuff. Thanks for your passion, and thanks for your time sharing everything with us today.
It was great to be here both with you guys. Thank you so much. I'm glad I was able to be a part of it.
Thanks for listening to Music Ed Insights.
We're supported by Group Dynamic, a leading provider of youth leadership workshops. Alan works with dozens of schools each year to help develop their leaders. Learn more at groupdynamic.net/youth-leadership.
Or you could email me at alan@groupdynamic.net. Also sponsored by the Co-College Music Education Program. They've got a website too.
Just click their link at our website or email me at shanley@coe.edu.
Also, The Normal Design, helping normal companies and people create memorable, meaningful, and professional designs and branding. More at thenormaldesign.com.
And Winterset Websites, website design and maintenance. wintersetwebsites.com.
Our Facebook page is Music Ed Insights.
Our website has program notes, links, and a one-page download of this episode's key takeaways. That's musicedinsights.com.
New episodes generally drop every couple weeks on Monday.
Get current.
Stay relevant.
Music Ed Insights.